Let me throw some out to you. Obviously, it's a mess, and I think we all agree. The president agrees, and he might be the first one out there to claim that. But so let's assume that. I mean, what do we do? We do nothing. Do we? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what a fix might be.
Well, let me say this, Steve.
Yeah.
Steve, that I think what this does is it points out once again how inept Washington is to handle these kind of big problems. On the one hand, the president claims credit for his Obamacare law, for the Affordable Care Act, and he deserves whatever credit he's entitled to because it is his signature legislation. But at the same time, such massive legislation adopted as quickly as this legislation was adopted simply begs for problems. And in my mind, a lot of this should have been aired out from the very beginning. Input from industry, input from all sorts of folks. What we're trying to do now is fix something that once the horse is out the barn, it's very, very tough to get that horse back in the barn again. And so fixes are going to be difficult to make work.
And where you need to not let these guys and gals off the hook. It really makes me mad because you see the Republicans say, well, we voted against it. We voted against this act. Well, you didn't ask the tough questions. All these things that are coming out now about whether you keep your policy or not, the benefit package, all of the details that show all the huge problems it faces were not aired out when this legislation was debated two and a half, 3 years ago. So I blame the Republican and Democratic members of Congress who caused this problem. Sure, Obama pushed it. He's messed it up in terms of handling it. But where's the checks and balances? Why wasn't our senators and congressmen standing toe-to-toe reading the legislation, which I'll bet none of them did, and had to ask some really tough questions as the process went through? Maybe the Republicans lost, but they were not asking the tough questions, and the Democrats weren't either, and they both have something to blame. Let me tell you what, I'm unabated about this. You better have a darn good reason in 2014 to vote for any of your incumbents out that way. Sit them down and ask some tough questions. If you don't get some better answers to their failure to look at this act, then vote against every one of them, from the president to the governor, the dog catcher. What does Eric Asher down there in New Orleans, the talk show host, says? They all got to go. And I'm a practical guy that's grown up in politics, but I think there's been huge negligence on the part of Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, for not eating this whole thing apart before we got stuck with the mess we're in today.
Jim, let me play the other side for a second and also express, what my concern is, and that is that, we have debated this now for, for 100 years, 50 years. I mean, this was always been a major issue. We've had a lot of discussions. The insurance companies could have done something about this early on. Everybody loves the idea, as I understand, loves the idea of having a cap, okay, and also getting rid of the pre-existing pre-existing conditions. So the insurance companies, the Democrats, the Republicans, business people, we all could have come up to the plate and said, okay, we're going to fix this within the system. We're not going to have government. We're going to do it ourselves because that's what the people want. Okay, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So because it didn't happen, then when the Democrats got into power, they compromised. That's what they did. They compromised because, as Obama said, look, there were liberals out there who wanted to do a whole lot more. So how in the world do we do what the people want, which is pre-existing conditions removals, which are cap removals? How do we do that within a private sector? So, as far as I'm concerned, and this is what I've said publicly, until somebody can tell me how we do that and do it and pay for it, and best within the private sector. But until we can do that, I mean, where are we?
Steve, everything you said could have been implemented in the state of Louisiana by Governor Bobby Jindal. He wrote a big article in the Wall Street Journal that said what you said, pre-existing condition, allowing policies to be sold across state lines, letting the children stay on the policy till they're 26. Everything that we're talking about could have been done on a statewide level. And again, I go back to those in power. Look, the insurance company is there to make a profit, and they play by the rules that you're given to them, as do banks, as do any other business. So the state legislature out there is not off the hook either. They could have implemented most of what you find in these acts to tighten it up, to help people who had pre-existing conditions, to do a number of things like this. And the legislature punted on it. They didn't do anything, and the governor did not show leadership at all on this issue.
But Jim,
you're letting the politicians off the hook too much, Steve. I'm going to hold you.
No. I'm playing the game in terms of, hey, that's government regulation, state government regulation of a private industry, okay, but it's still government regulation. I'm not saying it's not any better. I mean, certainly state is better than federal. I think we all agree with that. But it's still government regulation, Lawrence.
Well, look, there's much in Obamacare. There's several things in Obamacare that most people agree with, and you just mentioned them, and Jim just mentioned it as well. The real problem that we have today is the fact that, and I think we all agree on this, I don't think anybody read the bill. If you remember Nancy Pelosi's famous words, we've got to pass the bill to find out what's in it. It reminds me of some of my days in the legislature, where I saw the legislature actually pass bills coming out of a conference committee where there really was no bill at the time. There really was no bill. The bill was going to come after the vote. So that's what the real problem is. And Jim is absolutely correct. This is the fault of Democrats and Republicans. Republicans have a tendency, and no one's been more critical of Republicans than I have, as you well know if you read my commentaries. They really never came front and center with any real alternatives. Democrats, on the other hand, could not follow Barack Obama's lead any better than what they did through the health care debate. You cannot tell me that if this legislation had not been more closely looked at and more closely examined, that it would not today be a better piece of legislation. I think it would have. So it is the fault of our leadership in Congress for not having asked enough questions and not having asked the right questions. And unfortunately, just to go a step further, we do have a culture in Washington where if one side of the aisle says yes, the other side of the aisle says no.
Sure.
Fill in any name you want. One side says yes, the other one says no. One side says it's a beautiful day outside. The other side says, look at the storm coming. That's our problem in Washington is that everybody has a line in this. There's a line in the sand, and nobody wants to meet in the middle. Nobody wants to cross that line. Everybody wants to stay on their side of the line, but for their narrow constituencies. And the people in the middle, the people who really rely on government, the people who wake up in the morning, go to work, do what they're supposed to do, they're the ones who are getting shortchanged the most in all of this. And it's regrettable and unfortunate.